Should they bring them up with all that?
Just want to say a quick good evening on the front end to trustees. I believe we're waiting for Trustee Starks. I know it is just a touch after 5. Again, let everybody know we are streaming live on YouTube. And assuming, by the way, that there is not quick legislative action, it is seemingly more likely that the end of the month full Board of Trustee meeting would be held in person. At least to constitute a quorum. So we're not hearing more noise on that in terms of an extension right now. So obviously a lot can happen in the next 2 months, but just want to give a little prompt as we're waiting that we are live and on YouTube right now, but that by the end of the month, we may need to build a quorum in person with trustees.
Mac's having trouble getting in.
Okay, thanks for that. Nanette, maybe you want to just try emailing him directly with the link again. I'm just checking the net. We need 4, right, for a quorum?
Yes, we do.
So members of the committee, and then we are able to include Mary Kay as chair. So between Trustee Murren, Trustee Krause, Trustee McDonald, we've got 3. So we would need 1 more. Okay.
Let me check with Maurice. I don't see him either, right?
Okay.
I did let Mac know that you'd be resending him the link.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Vicky. Recent. There.
Good evening, all.
Hi, Mac.
Evening.
Hello. Sorry about that. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with my connection, but it was trying to get me into Google Meets instead of Zoom. So, anyways, we're running 6 minutes after. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm assuming we got a quorum.
Mhm.
Awesome. Great. Why don't we jump right in?
Okay, Mary Kate Murin,
Present.
Max Starks,
Present.
Vicky Kraus,
Present.
Maurice Lindsay, Jeff Sattler, and Janae McDonald.
Present.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Renee. With that, why don't we go right into our fiscal year 2021 financial review, cash flow projection.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I just want to start by thanking Dorothy and Jason for all the work they've done preparing some of the materials for this meeting. Tonight, you're going to hear kind of a tag team presentation from me and John Tudrin. So that'll be a little twist on what we've been doing over the last few months. And you probably even hear more from John than from me tonight. But John's going to get us started with the cash flow.
Great. Okay. Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Okay, so you'll see on the cash flow, if we can move to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. We currently have a cash balance of approximately $7.7 million available at TD Bank, and this is a healthier cash position than we're used to seeing at this time of the year. It's also a healthier position than what we were looking at last month. And so there's a couple of factors that I just wanted to call out, what changed from last month to this month. And primarily it was the reallocation of how we're going to be paying some of our bills over the course of this final month of the fiscal year. So you may recall that we have some underspending in our full-time salaries line as well as our utilities line. We typically pay for full-time salaries and utilities out of the state appropriation. Because those lines are coming in less than budgeted and less than expected, we are transferring other expenses to the state appropriation. We need to make sure that we pay down the state we need to make sure that we utilize all of the state appropriation funds because whatever we don't use, we would lose. And so it's a strategic viewpoint that we have where we're trying to make sure that we spend that down. So basically last month we had some expenses that we were originally planning on paying from our account at TD Bank. We have since changed direction and we're going to be paying those out of the state appropriation. The other factor is that simply some of the expenses are coming in less than we had projected. Some of the expenses in May are coming in a little bit less than projected. And also that continues to be the case for what we expect to see in June as well. So a combination of the two factors are what leads to the change from last month to this month.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
So this is Matt. Question for you. So this is a huge balance, right? In this account, which is not typical for us at all. I mean, one thing, timing of spend is one thing, but this is not timing. This is remaining. This goes to the end of October. right? So I mean, if you flash this cash flow last month, it would be a stark difference. So again, how do you explain that with kind of timing of spend?
Certainly. So really, I think a big part of the timing of the spend is the use of funds that we're going to be paying our invoices from. So this balance would have been significantly lower last month, right? It was somewhere in the vicinity of, we're projecting to be around $3.2 million at the end of June. And now we're seeing closer to $7 million at the end of June. And that's because we're reallocating some of those expenses that aren't coming out of the TD Bank source of funds, but instead it's coming out of that state appropriation bucket. And to your point too, one thing that Andrea and I have started to have conversations with, and we will continue over the summer, is because this is such a healthy cash balance, is we're talking about, okay, because we're in a position that we haven't been in previously, we probably want to look at, what can we do to make best use of these funds? To have the conversation about, is this something that we can invest with fiduciant? I know that we have a couple of other options available as well, an MDT or whatnot, but that's something that we want to continue that conversation. And we also know there's an investment subcommittee meeting at the beginning of August. So our plan is to have some ideas as to how we can move strategically forward, taking most advantage of this cash balance.
Right. Yeah. Ultimately, the question is going to be, are you planning to come back to us with, okay, you're using funds that you hadn't planned on using. Then what are you doing with this excess? So yeah, we'll definitely look forward to having that conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. You're welcome. And just to point out, this does include some of the HERF funds. So I can say HERF, CARES, CARISA, ARPA. Those are all reference to essentially the same funding source of HERF. So this includes some of the HERF funds for our direct expenses. So things such as testing, things such as cleaning, sanitization. So anytime we had an expenditure, you'll see an outflow included in this cash flow projection. You'll also see an inflow associated with those types of expenses. What this doesn't include is what we'll be talking about a little bit later on during this meeting, is potential uses of those HERF funds. So we're going to talk a little bit about, lost revenues or using some of these funds for adjunct expenses. That is not included in this forecast. And again, that might make this look a little more favorable, but again, we'll get to that conversation a little bit later. Are there any questions?
Nope, no more from me.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. If we can skip ahead, keep going through the cash flow, and I don't know how many slides it is, but past the green, past the green page, go to the next one. That's great. Thank you. So this is our usual revenue and spending report through May. It looks pretty similar to the last couple months. Last month, we were showing a net income of about 3.1 million. This month, we are closer to 3.4 million. I know this is hard to read on the screen. You have it in your packet if you want to look at the details. If we skip ahead to the next slide, please. This one really just shows the month-to-month changes. And again, the changes between last month and this month are pretty minimal. So if we go to the next slide, it really kind of gives us the highlights of what we're looking at 11 months into the year. So at this point, and this is actually a projection for year end. So we're getting close to the end of the year. The projected net operating income for FY21 is about 3.4 million. The way we've ended up here is with revenues that are unfavorable, but expenses that are favorable in a way that more than offsets the unfavorable revenue. So on the revenue side, not including the COVID funding, the revenue is unfavorable by about 1.9 million. This is mainly due to student tuition and fee revenue being unfavorable by 2.2 million based on credits being down about 10% from budget. We also, that was offset somewhat by the state appropriation coming in a bit higher than expected, with some money for workforce development, and then the formula funding coming in at 424,000 very late in the year. On the expense side, we've achieved expense savings of about 5 million, about 1.8 million in full-time employees, 1.3 million in part-time employees, and 1.9 million in other operating expenses and utilities. So again, this is the same story we've been telling for a few months. It hasn't really changed much. It looks like, you know, this projection has been pretty good for the last couple months, and we should, you know, it looks like this is where we'll end the year.
Andrea,
Yes.
before we leave that slide, it says that we're down 10% in credits. Is that better than what we expected, or is it 10% over what we had already projected? Because that 10% down seems pretty favorable compared to what we had been talking about during the year.
It's 10% down from the budget, which was already projected to be significantly down from the prior year. So year over year, I think it's 17 or 18%.
Okay. Still, I think a little bit better than what we had been thinking, because I thought we were originally 15 or 17 in the first semester, and then somewhere in excess of 20 for the second semester.
Those were the year over year numbers.
Okay. So this is
This is from the budget. So we had, and so if you take the enrollment levels from FY20, we budgeted less than that for FY21, and then the actuals in FY21 are coming in 10% lower than the budget. So
Okay.
the year over year numbers are down more than that, or like 8, you know, so in the spring, we're using 22%. So the spring
Andrea,
actuals are 22% down from last year.
Andrea, is that budget assumption on that prior slide where it shows the actual, you know, what was used in developing the budget? If you go back a couple slides, yeah, go up,
Yes.
yeah, that slide there, or maybe the one,
Yes.
yeah, that one. Is it on top where it shows what we assumed for?
Yes. So on the trustee approved budget, on column 1 at the top, if you can see that,
I
I've
know
got
it's
to
hard to see.
see if we can make it bigger. That's the so we're down from that number budget wise, but that number is lower than last year. It was already assumed to be lower than last year's actual. Does that help?
So the net of the fall being down, I can't read it too well, but fall, it like, is that 18% fall and then another 8%? Is it for spring? Is that was approved for the budget? And so the net of those two is
the budget was 10% down in fall and 6% down in spring.
10% and 6%. Oh, that's a lot lower than what I was thinking too. I thought we budgeted more of a reduction than that.
Well, I think we kept talking about there being more of a reduction. I guess that's my question, is that number does not seem as bad as what we were expecting.
Yeah.
I can lend a hand. So yes, right. So the final trustee approved budget had us down 10% in the fall and 6% in the spring. And a year ago, that even seemed pretty stunning to push ourselves to put those kind of numbers on the table. What you see then is we essentially split the difference. We lost about 4 million this year. And so where we landed at about down 17% in total in the fall and 19% in the spring. Again, as Andrea pointed out, for an overall loss of about 18%, give or take, in enrollment, it's like we got ourselves halfway there with what you approved in last year's budget. And we needed that additional. That's why you see it as about 1.9% in the slide.
And so, you know, essentially the dollar value from a student fee perspective was 2.2 million, you know, of that additional enrollment decline beyond what was in the budget. Any other questions on that? If not, we can jump ahead to, yes, that, I think, nope, that one, yes, thanks. So this is really just showing us very high level So what we just talked about did not include the HERF funds, or the federal COVID relief funds that we've been talking about. So here we can see the revenue and the expenses, in our projection, with the net operating income projected to be 3.4 million. And then if you recall at the last meeting, when we talked with the auditors about the use of the HERF funds, this scenario here is showing probably a maximum use in FY21 of $7 million of the HERF funds. This number is a bit higher than what we talked about last month. Since the last meeting, and now we've met with our auditors again, showed them our calculation, and they are really continuing to advocate that we maximize the use of those funds this year, because as we look ahead to next year, it'll be harder to use them. So in this case, we just wanted to give you a look at what it looks like when if we use those HERF funds in FY21, we could have a total operating income closer to $10 million versus the 3.4 million. And again, those funds would go into reserves, and then we would have them to sort of deal with any issues coming up in the future. So I just want to stop there. I'm sure there'll be a question.
So the HERF funds, do those become top line? Do they go on as revenue?
Exactly. And so
expenses, how does that work?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question?
The HERF funds, so those will show on top line as revenue?
Yes, depends on how we use them. And so in a minute, John's going to go through some details on HERF and how we're going to use those funds. But in general, we can use those funds. When we use those funds for things like lost revenue, it goes right to the bottom line. It's not really offsetting actual expenses, and it's an allowable use. And so it will be a revenue entry, yes. And then we'll bring the cash in as well. So this will increase our cash and revenue. So I'm thinking that I'm happy to answer questions, but the next part of our agenda, John will be sharing information about the HERF funds, both the student and the institutional funds, and talking about how we're thinking about using those. So if it's okay, we'll move on to that.
Okay. So what you're looking at on this chart is an overview of the 3 different sources of HERF funds that we've received. HERF 1, HERF 2, HERF 3, also known as CARES, CARISA, ARPA. And just to kind of walk you through the slide a little bit, anything that's shaded in blue has actually been recognized either as an expense or it's been encumbered. Anything that is shaded in orange is available and has yet to be determined as to exactly how those funds will be spent down or used. You'll see that we've been using the student portion, trying to get those funds out to the students as quickly as possible. So you'll see under the CARES Act, we've received $1.9 million for the student portion, and we've utilized all those funds. You'll also see under HERF 2, the CARISA, that we've spent the majority of those student funds. What we are working towards now is strategizing how to use the institutional portion, as Andrea had just mentioned. So again, this kind of gives you a snapshot, puts things in perspective as to the size of the different allocations that we've received, as well as the plans of what we need to do to spend down these funds. And all of this information is reflective of information that's through May. And so if we can turn to the next chart, to the next slide, please. This just gives you an indication as to how we've been using the student portion. So from HERF 1, again, we've had that $1.9 million. We've dispersed it to over 4,000 students, and all of it was issued to students in the form of a check. That was what was required by the guidelines. There was no option to apply the funds to a student's account. You'll see under HERF 1/MSI, or Minority Serving Institution, also known as Title III. We've awarded those funds to over 800 students. And that had different guidelines. So that allowed us to apply funds to students' outstanding balances. And so that there you'll see the majority of the funds being applied to those students' outstanding balances. And then as we get into HERF2 or Carissa, we've awarded it to over 3,000 students. There is a little bit more of a split here. Again, the vast majority did go to students as checks in hand. There was, again, different criteria where students had the ability to opt in to have the funds applied to their student account if they had an outstanding balance. So we needed to have them opt in order for us to apply those funds to the balance. So you'll see that shade of blue is the students that opted in. And then the 22% in the gray shaded area are funds that still need to be awarded. And we are planning on dispersing additional funds prior to the end of this fiscal year. So we should be coming close to spending down that bucket of funds.
And how do those dollars get determined?
There was a strategy. So it's up to the institution to determine the strategy. There's no guidance or guidelines as to specifically how much can or should be awarded to students. I don't have the specific calculation in front of me, but I do know that there was conversation that Dean of Student Financial Services, Jeremy Greenhouse, was involved in, as well as others, to determine the need. So things that were taken into consideration were, students have the need to cover their internet and utilities expenses. Students had the need for laptops to continue, obviously, their education, and specifically remote education. They had living expenses. All of those were qualified expenses that led into that formula. But again, I don't have that specific formula for you at this point, but I can get that.
But did we give money to every student? Was there a financial aid component? I mean, how did we I don't need the specific formula, but in general, did every student get some level of funding?
I can help with that. So it depends which bucket we're talking about. With HERF2, I believe every student got something, but the regulations tell us that we should prioritize students with greater need. And so some of that orange bucket there was just checks that were sent to people without them expressing a need, but we can determine need based on if someone is Pell eligible, if they're financial aid eligible, or if they're not financial aid eligible. So the amounts that were sent to people sort of automatically in the spring, this past spring semester, were based on what bucket they fell into. In addition to that, there's money available that we've provided for people who make special requests. So if someone makes a request and says, I can't pay my rent, or I'm having trouble, I don't have money for a computer. Those requests are all reviewed individually, and we've awarded quite a lot of money based on need as well. And that's something that will continue into the HERF3 funds, because, going forward, just to point out, this HERF2 bucket was about $2 million. We have $7 million to spend on students in HERF3. And so, we'll be talking about how to allocate those funds as well. But really, it's a combination of some flat amounts to everyone at certain, depending on what their need is based on their financial aid eligibility, and need-based requests.
Okay. So if a student was not on financial aid, they would not have received any funding?
They, I believe, would have received, well, they would have two opportunities. So there would have been a smaller check sent out. And in addition to that, if they have needs that they express to us, there's a form, like an online form they can fill out. And that lets them tell us if they're having some financial trouble and if they need some help. And so I don't know, Darcy, if you want to jump in about that process.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Andrea. So all students receive some form of payment out of the HERF2. And as Andrea indicated, and that was was various levels dependent on need. I want to say there were 3 different levels. And then, yes, we work collaboratively, the Center for Access Services and Student Financial Services, to look at need-based requests. And if they didn't meet the guidelines for HERF funding, we would funnel them to the student emergency fund so that the student could be assisted. So it was definitely a collaborative process and continues to be one.
Great, thank you.
Excuse me, I got to jump off, but I will be back on shortly. Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, we can move to the next slide. Okay. And what this illustrates is just a scenario of how, strategic estimates, a strategy and estimates on how we can be using the funds that we were looking at the earlier slide. So again, we have in the vicinity of $13.5 million that's available to us. And just to kind of walk you through this, on FY21, what we can recognize for this current year is approximately $4 million in lost revenue. We've run through a couple of calculations. We went through it a couple of different ways, and we came up again with the $4 million mark each way. And again, that's reflective of the lost enrollment. The $2 million is to cover payroll expenses, and that's focusing on adjunct faculty. So any adjuncts that previously haven't taught online, but are now teaching online, they were definitely impacted by COVID. And that's what, talking with the auditors, looking at the guidelines, that's what it speaks to. Anything that had a COVID impact would be eligible to use these HERF funds. So again, we feel like this is a conservative approach to look at just those adjuncts that have not previously taught online, but are over the course of this year. And then the correlating indirect expenses just on those adjuncts' salaries. So basically that's the $7 million mark that Andrea presented in the earlier slide. Again, we feel like this is kind of like the higher estimate and just, one scenario. Continuing that line of thought into next year, there would also be another $4 million that we anticipate we could recognize in lost revenue. That's based on what the budget, based on the approved budget, based on the number of credits that the budget is built off of for FY22, we would come to that same $4 million figure. If enrollment comes in lower than we're budgeting, then that $4 million figure would increase. We're also looking at $1.5 million for direct COVID expenses. So testing, sanitizing, and other direct expenses, and $1 million for IT for the use towards switches and Wi-Fi. There's $1.7 million that's already included. It's already aligned in the FY22 budget, and that would be utilizing, we would use $1 million from the HERF funds towards that line. So this isn't definitive, but this just gives you an idea about how we could be spending down those funds, how quickly we could be spending down and utilizing those HERF funds that we saw in the previous slide. And again, as Andrea mentioned, just to reiterate, we have had conversations with the auditors throughout this process, walking through our calculations, talking about our intended use, and they've been supportive and confirming, that these are eligible uses, and again, just working with them to think, whether they will be testing or somebody else will be testing this from an audit perspective down the road, the information that we'll need to provide and have available. So again, we've been working with them throughout this process. Are there any questions on this?
So again, it sounds like we're in close collaboration with the accountants. So as if they're reviewing the scenarios under which we're making these calculations, that's great. I guess the payroll piece is a little bit strange to me. I get that there might be expenses associated with going remote for an adjunct faculty member because they might need training or a computer or something else. But if they're already a faculty member, I don't know how we allocate their payroll to that if they're already teaching, and it's just that instead of being in the classroom, they went remote. Like I get the indirect portion, I don't get the whole payroll component, but I assume if the accountants are looking at this and verifying that we can offset their salary in some way, that's great.
Yeah, we thought the same, Vicki, but it was confirmed by the auditors during the last meeting where we had a robust conversation on the use and their comfort level,
Great.
and which is great. And I know that Andrea and Jonathan are spending a lot of time with them just to make sure, just like most colleges probably are spending a lot of time with their auditors, just because this is money that it's a lot of it, right, going across the board. So we'll continue to keep everyone updated on that.
Thank you.
Great. I'm acting as Mac, which I will not be as adept as he. So I think we're transitioning right into facility projects report.
Yes, thank you. So, yep, that's the slide. So again, this is a slide that looks very similar to what we've seen over the last few months. If you recall, we started the year with a $2 million carryover of a facilities budget from the prior years. And we had $3.1 million from the FY21 budget. At this point, we have spent a little under $1.5 million out of the $2 million carryover. We do expect that by the end of the year, we should be spending in total about the $2 million of the carryover. So the expectation is that we would be carrying over it actually ended up being $3.2 million. So the $3.2 million from the FY21 budget, we expect to be carrying that over. We have a lot of things in the works. I have a list here of summer projects from Deb Avery, and I think there are 32 items on the list. And so just as a reminder, we had significant delays mainly due to COVID. And so because things got started later, the spending in FY21 has been less than what it would have been, but we definitely will be catching up with that. I'll also mention, because I know it's come up a few times in this meeting, that the radio station project is on track. That's one that had been delayed and we were waiting for some approvals, and those approvals came through. So that's one that will be starting in the summer. I know people have asked about that one, but if there are any questions about anything else here, I'm happy to try to answer those. Otherwise, we can go on to the next slide. And this is just, again, this looks very similar to what we've seen. This is the 5-year DCAM spending report, and pretty much on track. We have some large projects coming up. HVAC upgrades in a couple of buildings. We're replacing the roof in building 32, and then those are all significant projects that are ramping up at this point. So I think we're on track with this budget as well. So any questions on this?
So it just looks like at the end of next fiscal year, we still have a pretty significant portion of unspent funds.
Yes, although this is really a long-term project. So if you look at this one, if you look at FY22, and you can see that, you can see FY21 had a relatively small amount and FY22 has a large amount. That's because we're getting into some really big projects that have just been, we're just in the process of getting those approved to move forward to the next step by DCAM. And so we will be spending, there'll be significant project work happening in the next year.
But again, it looks like there's about 2.6 million that's unspent at the end of fiscal 22. Is that right? Under the remaining balance?
It's not really we have to think of the fiscal years here as being sort of artificial milestones. And so these weren't dollars that the DCAM dollars were actually allocated for the full 5 years, not year by year. And so, there could be timing differences, but really we don't expect any of this to be unspent at the end of the 5-year period.
Okay, so it's just that we don't have uses allocated for fiscal 23. So it looks like that money is still available just because we don't have it designated to specific projects.
Right. As time goes on, we'll figure out what the priorities are and spend those funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Some of it, I think, has been preserving a little bit of room in case of emergencies, which for us are unfortunately fairly typical as opposed to rare and uncommon. So I think that's been part of why we haven't in the ECAM system fully encumbered and accounted for all of it.
Great.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? I think we are all
I don't
set.
think so. So John, I think we're going right into your perspective.
Sure. Again, good evening, everyone. I'll be brief. Let me first start with an introduction, and then if we can pull down the slides, I just want to have a backdrop, John Reynolds. You'll see a new face, Dr. Shay Butler, who joins us as our Interim Vice President of Advancement and External Affairs. Shay, do you want to just say a brief hi and a little bit about your...
Sure. Greetings, everyone. I wrapped up my first week. I'm in week 2, day 1, and it has been nonstop. It's been great. Happy to be here, bring my experience, expertise as I learn in this transition, and it's been great. Great team. Everything so far has been wonderful. So thank you.
It's good to have Shay in the mix. Yep. Week 2, day 1 of that, just drinking from the fire hose with the news I'm going to share, right, about Building 20 in particular. First, let me start with a thank you. My thanks as well to Andrea Nathanson, her team of Dorothy Unger and Jason Cohen. You know, the notes I have here about just how proactive our team has been with managing the use of funds and forecasting. It's been pretty incredible. I think about how the questions that are asked, and then we say, it depends. I just want to check and see if I'm freezing on people.
Oh, you're good, John.
Okay. So yes, when it depends is the first thing that we sort of offer as context from our finance people. It's been a really big year. I also think about how very different heading into this summer is versus last summer. You know, we had just been on literally a stay-at-home order for the last 10 weeks prior. A lot of these federal dollars that we're talking about were just a hope and a dream in people's minds, and we're far from reality. And they offer a certain amount of masking, quite frankly, to the challenges that we face as an institution. As Andrea has really pointed out, our base budget now is a deficit budget and significant millions. And so these federal dollars are really helping us, especially as we try to move things around and sort of match them against the state appropriation that we have. You know, I also think about just how convoluted things can look sometimes. In there, probably lost in the details, we had expected to start being charged for our clinical placements. This is when a nursing student goes to, let's say, a Bay State. So we had almost 300,000 trustees in there as a potential expense. That never came to pass. So some of the surplus, if you will, can be attributed to things like, well, we thought we were going to have to start paying for those clinicals and we never did. So there's just been a lot of flux in the budget this year. What I would offer is going forward, especially as we launch our next strategic planning process, is we really want to stay connected with you and with this committee in particular on what does stabilization look like, what does sustainability look like, and then match that to our desire to be innovative. You know, here's the backdrop, everyone. We do have a pretty remarkable footprint in allied health. We have been in a very special bucket for study with DCAM. And as you see on their own website, they say that information from this study will be incorporated into a request for capital funding and submitted as part of the FY21 funding approval. Unfortunately, the news that I shared with all of you today and that we have now a bit more publicly is that we were not included in this round of funding, which is unfortunate. There has been truly 4 years worth of advocacy and leaving no stone unturned for that. We also were declined for federal earmarking, particularly out of Congressman Neal's office. We have submitted to our two US senators for that earmark process, but we have not necessarily found the joy at the federal level for this Building 20 project either. And again, it's cause for concern. We're going to do that safety assessment, and we may learn some even further hard truths about what is needed to spend against the building that we know we need to get out of. So again, we will keep you very much informed around that. As I shared in my email, I've already got a meeting with Commissioner Santiago, the Commissioner of Higher Education. We'll seek a meeting with Secretary of Education, Secretary Pizer. We know we have to keep after this relocation of our School of Health. You've heard the numbers, you know just how significant and concerning the deferred maintenance is in a building that has had significant millions already in emergency issues. So we will persist, we will persevere, and we will keep after it. But that really is the look ahead, in particular with ways and means as we think about what is the sustainable, what is the stabilized work ahead when it comes to facilities and infrastructure. So really that's the context. So I'll turn it back over to Andrew. Thanks.
Just a quick question in terms of Building 20. Now that no funds have been allocated, do we have other options on how to move forward if the state is not going to fund us any renovations for the project across the street? Can we do it in another way? Can we get creative? Can somebody else do it for us and hopefully save money on the construction to that building, and then we lease it on a long-term basis? Can we lease other space somewhere? Are there other options that aren't the college doing it with allocation of funds, since that hasn't come through?
Right. I guess I want to make sure that we are exhausting all options. So to that, here's the challenge. Because these programs by and large carry accreditation, if we go too far away from the college, it will trigger a whole new round of accreditation by these programs, and we may have to duplicate services because it's required by them. So take our nursing program. If we stray too far away, they may say you have to host library services, advising, tutoring, and all those other ancillary services wherever you relocate your nursing program. So that's the sort of follow through that is particularly hard, and why the tech park was just such a help for us, because we could hold that and make the case that it's just across the street. In some ways, it's part of a sort of larger macro campus footprint. So even if we went downtown, so to speak, we may get pushed into exceeding carrying costs because of all those other student supports. But again, we're going to exhaust all the options. What I would say is, to that question even, it's not like the state has said never. They just said not this round in the way that they do. So we are already being invited to apply for the next round, which I think will open up this fall. The challenge for us is the tech park is just such an asset because it has vacant space right now that can be repurposed. The problem for them is they can't wait 3 years. That given the nature of that entity, the Assistance Corporation, they will have to move sooner to find tenants. And that's why our window is going to sort of close. What you also know is, if that's the issue with off campus, on campus is hard because we've got these antique buildings, and it's going to just, fully push up the cost of any kind of peel apart the School of Health and have islands of programs in different spots on campus.
Could the tech park do the work? And again, I'm not quite as clear on the actual structure of the entity, but could the tech park do the work and then lease it out to the college on a long-term basis?
Yep, that was always our hope, is first that they would be what's called the project manager of record. But they are, as a quasi-public, subjected to prevailing wage and bid and procurement requirements. So there's only so much savings that they can actually realize that way. They're just not able to do it like a private would. So that's still the idea. That's still the hope. The challenge is we needed DCAM help for the total amount given the size of the project. That was always the desire, is the 20 or 25 million from the state, if you will, was the way we could package this together. What we know, right, is that if we somehow took on debt, that is a significant concern for us going forward because of how enrollment is just so hard for us to predict something. So we've kind of carried an adversity, if you will, to somehow entering even into a debt scenario with the tech park, and they would sort of go and find the financing. That's been hard.
And are there any other buildings on campus that could be better suited for the programs?
We actually did this study with DCAM in round 1 of this. We're actually in sort of round 2 of the study phase. And what DCAM to their own math found is that anything on campus raised the project cost by a significant factor. And again, why is that? Because the buildings are so old and don't have systems. To renovate, you've got to do things like touch the HVAC systems, the mechanicals, things like that. And that just escalates the cost of the projects. So that's why on campus in our buildings were deemed far less viable than like anywhere else. It's a real predicament. It really is. It's a real predicament.
Maggie just rejoined.
You missed all the good
missed all
news
the
I had
fun.
to share about building
We were
20.
Yeah, you
talking
sent that.
about Building 20.
Yeah, the lovely email earlier, and then missed all that. But apologies.
That's okay.
We're just talking about the what comes next. First of all, we
There were
have to
any
do a
other
safety
options?
assessment, right, to really find out what is viability heading into the fall as we repopulate campus. We have to know. We have to be open-eyed about that, and it may mean we have no choice but to put money into a building that we are desperately trying to get out of. Again, life safety may force our hand. But even this idea of, well, what about third party and off campus? And as I shared, when you have these accredited health programs, if you stray too far from campus, not only will it trigger accreditation visits by those, they may say, wherever you land, you have to have library support, tutoring help, advisors, and then that just escalates. That's why the tech park was just so wonderfully advantageous to us. So again, we're having to really re-examine just how long and viable can we remain in building.
And is there an assessment or another assessment, I should say, underway to really pinpoint what we think our options are?
Yeah, I mean, this is the work we've been doing with DCAM for over a year. They sort of studied us first and looked at on campus, and everything was exorbitant. I think the least costly option was like 54 million or something like that, and it escalated all the way to over 120 million. And that was with all these different moves to sort of have to ship some different things around. So we have that, and again, it's just not been advantageous enough to even bring to trustees. It just never seemed viable. So we got this second phase of a study, if you will, where DCAM helped us look more generically, and that was always the telegraph then to go across the street to the tech park because they had square footage that could actually accommodate this. But we needed that kickstart of those those state dollars. We needed that 20 or 25 million to really give us the foundation in the stack to get this project going.
Yeah, that changes everything, not having that funding available to us. I mean, it's a complete rethink. I mean, we were thinking before we would get funding, so at some level, right? I mean, but that's completely changed. So, yeah, I think when I got on, I think where Vicky was going with, okay, well, now that given the circumstances, we now know what are our options, or what are our best options.
Yep, and I can tell you again, because we've thought so deeply about this. The one thing that I'll share that I want to make sure you're read in, Trustee Starks, on this, is that the window at the tech park is only so big. They have to start renting that space soon so that they can remain viable. And if we lose that window, then we lose the ability to really relocate ourselves. And then we're really stuck with what we have is what we have. What I can also offer, and I don't say this because we know how much Trustee Alexa Exposito champions nursing. Nursing is that high level mark for us in this school. It's a program that has somewhere between 170 and 200 students in it, right? We graduated to 72 this past year. We cannot risk losing a program. And there is so much of that high fidelity, high technology patient simulation that we preserve this year through the in-person. That has to be central with signature. And again, that's not just have them go take classes in that other building that we have on campus. There is an incredible amount of planning, budgeting that would have to go in just to even relocate nursing out of that program. And again, that's the pain that we have to really now contemplate, is how much do we want to peel apart a school of health that intentionally has tried to hang together, because that's the healthcare model these days.
Dr. Cook, you referenced a short window. Literally, how short?
I think because I sit on that board by nature of my position, they're on a clock for about a year. they needed to start seeing some dollars flow over the next 12 months. That's the short, because we thought although it was more than breadcrumbs, it was DCAM actually spending money, right, on our studies. For the last year and a half, we've actually been in study with DCAM. We thought we were actually going to even be moving sooner with the tech park already by this point. So that when they had that large vacancy from that tenant who did leave during COVID, that we were even more positioned to make this happen. So it's, yeah, we're coming up against it that soon.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Yep, more to come.
Thank you, Dr. Cook.
So if you just go
ahead.
to the. So just a quick intro here. This will be just a quick high-level summary of where we are with enrollment, both for the summer and the fall. We were asked to just give an update on summer, and then for fall, we really want to just show, because it's the final enrollment is really an unknown at this point, and it's in flux, and it has a big impact on the budget. We wanted to bring to this committee, what the enrollment impact might be on the budget. And also, we're just going to throw in some statistics on summer enrollment. So John's going to share some statistics, and I'll talk about the budget.
So we're looking at summer session 1 and 1E, which falls in the current fiscal year. So we're in FY21 right now. And basically, we're looking at a 3-year comparison with our blue bars, our registered students, or I'm sorry, registered credits. The orange bar represents confirmed students and confirmed credits. In other words, they made payment arrangements. And then the gray bar is what we use as a freeze date. It's our official numbers, the one that we report out on. That's pretty much after all of the enrollment activity settles down. That's the number that, again, we report. So you can see in FY21 for summer session 1, we are trailing the last 2 fiscal years. Again, we can attribute a lot of that to COVID, as we would expect. One piece that did jump out at me a little bit was the difference between the confirmed students and the registered students. When you compare that to the previous 2 years, there's more of a difference. The good news is, looking at the numbers again today, that has kind of leveled off. So it's much more in line with the previous 2 years. And again, you can just see how on the right, there's percent change from FY20 to FY21, how we're seeing, a decline of somewhere in the vicinity of 18 to 26%, depending on which bucket you're looking at. And if we can move to the next slide. This is summer session 2. So this falls into next fiscal year. Because summer session 2 begins on July 12th, the revenues are recognized next fiscal year. Again, FY21 is trailing the previous 2 years. We've budgeted down 10% for summer session 2, and you can see again over on the right how we're trending down approximately 24, 25%. So still have a little work to do, but we also have a little bit of time to try and make up ground. And again, this is kind of what's going to feed into a slide, I think it's 2 slides later, that Andrea will be touching base about what the financial impact could be depending on different scenarios. And if we can move to the next slide. So this is looking at where we stand for the upcoming fall semester. Again, this is day 52 in the enrollment cycle. So this is as of June 5th. And overall enrollment is down approximately 20%. And this is just showing how it's broken up by school, just to give you a sense as to the size, the impact of each school. They're all relatively have the same impact of being down to 20%. I know that health and patient simulation is looking the most favorable among the 3. The reality is, again, looking at the numbers today, they kind of fall more in line. The updated numbers kind of fall more in line with that 20%. So a little bit of a moving target, as we've been mentioning. But basically, this will kind of lead into that next slide, which Andrea will kind of share with you what those financial impacts could be, depending on how enrollment trends over the next couple of months.
Can I just ask a question? Have we been able yet to determine whether we're going back in person in the fall, and has that been communicated, and does that have an impact on all of this at some level?
The short answer is yes. We've been, in some ways vigorously trying to communicate what we are aiming for this fall. Some of the emails that I push you as trustees have some of that memo, for example, from Human Resources. There's a sort of chicken and the egg almost. So to this point around, let's just do classes. We have a number of on-campus sections offered right now. What we're not seeing is a stampede by students to register for them. So that's, again, one of the challenges we're working through. What we are also trying to do is use the summer, as you've seen us sort of communicate, as a transition to bring services back onto campus, like admissions, like financial aid. And our target goal is to have that up and in person by August. But again, one of the things we're navigating are collective bargaining agreements, and also sort of this remote world that people clearly have been doing for the better part of a year. So short answer, yep, we're trying to get ourselves positioned for a robust on-campus fall semester. The mechanics and the operations under that are definitely in progress.
How do we communicate that, though, to potential students who may not want to come back if they can't be on campus? I mean, I think we felt last year that a number of students, maybe the recent high school graduates, were going to take a break before starting if they couldn't come on campus. How do we and when can we determine that we're going to be on campus and communicate that in a positive marketing way so that the students know what they're doing and they can plan and they can get excited that they can actually be back on campus?
Yeah, I won't put our interim VP, I won't put Jay Butler on the spot with that, but let me turn to our VP of Student Affairs, who I think really has a sense of what is she hearing from her advisors, from her admissions counselors around students knowing what the fall is, what they want, and our on-campus offering. So Darcy, if you want to help shape that.
Yeah, so in working collaboratively with Academic Affairs, we developed a landing page called Schedule Your Day Your Way, and it gives a really nice overview of what the different methods of instruction look like. And so when we are calling students to help them get registered, we're doing high engagement. We see a student's not registered, we give them a call, we email them. It's a consistent process that the professional advisors work with faculty advisors on. And we go through what the various options are. And some people are ready to make a decision about how they want to schedule for fall, and some are still waiting for things to kind of settle in their own families and to get a sense of schedules for their children or anyone else they are caretakers for. And so some students will let us know they just need a little bit more time to figure it out. We circle back with them as well. If a student registers themselves, the advisors get a notification of that, and they go in and they take a look at what the student has registered for and then contact them with various options. If, for example, there's a new, course that's opened up that's on campus versus online. What we are seeing, though, is a little bit of a difference. My understanding in years past is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. were the times that everybody went for those on-campus classes. And when we opened registrations, we started to see that it was really more some late afternoon classes that students were looking for on campus. So we did a couple surveys. We did one just as registration was opening to find out where students were, kind of where their heads were at for registering. And now we have another one that's out. So as the state begins to open, as we're, moving in a direction towards more on-campus supports and courses, we're trying to see how the students are responding to that and developing our plans accordingly.
And if I could just add one thing, one just brief comment, is that post-COVID emerging practices really show that students are right now looking for more of a tailored experience. And so you're starting to see colleges sort of try to coordinate a la carte experiences. And so the proactive marketing is, you know, if you want in person, we have it. If you want online, we have it. So as we move forward, some of the messaging that you'll see come out of marketing will sort of align itself with these emerging practices.
Great point. And to put just a fine coda on the end of all this, when you have dorms, you can really say, come back, because they know they'll figure it out no matter what it is. You could take your online classes from the dorm, or you can go to class from the dorm. That's what's so different, apple to orange, with community colleges, right? Is we don't have the ability to message that because we don't have the residential piece. And I think if you see that difference and wonder, why can't STIC just say it like that? It's, I think, to all these points, and we just don't have that residential element to it.
And I understand the a la carte piece, and we need our students to want to come back, and we need to make it as, you know, appealing for them as possible. But I think, you know, if you look in the business world a little bit, I think what companies are facing is that employees don't necessarily want to come back to work, even though their jobs have never been remote. They now have been remote for over a year. And so everybody sort of thinks that's the new normal. And I think a lot of businesses have recognized that at some level, they need to say, you know, you're coming back effective a certain date, and not give so much wiggle room, because otherwise I think people will try to decide, well, I want to work Monday, Wednesday afternoon. And then, you know, it's almost like giving too many options sometimes makes it a little overcomplicated. And something we probably really can't facilitate.
Point well taken. You'll forgive me for raising this. And that's why that is being bargained collectively with our unions at the state level.
And I can also clarify, just with the a la carte, the recommendation has been, you know, within these experiences that you're informing your market, that they can sort of have it their way, to quote Burger King, is that you're packaging different options for them to choose from. So there are parameters. It's not a free for all. So if I was remiss in explaining that piece of it, you're sharing that there are various options that they can select from.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great. I just, you know, again, I see it sort of in the more traditional business setting, is that it's getting, the longer this has gone on, the more complexity and difficult it's become to get people back to work. The pandemic is not the norm. You know, what we did during the pandemic is not the normal, and getting people back to something that was more normal seems to be getting a little bit more difficult. And I just wonder, at some point, do we have to kind of figure out how to push people back in that direction? Or maybe we'll never go back to that direction. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I see it in business. And a lot of, you know, certain businesses have said, we're going to open and you're going to come back. And, you know, there's grumble. My kids don't, you know, what am I going to do with my kids? But you've always had children to figure out daycare for. So it's just a comment, I guess, about being sometimes giving too many options can make it, I think, too complex and difficult for us to manage as an institution.
Point well taken, Vicki. I think as our, you know, area colleges around us, we want to go with them also, but I don't disagree. I get the business thing that we're both in. But I think we continue to keep an eye on. Look, options are always good in my mind. If that can expand potentially the enrollment, you just never know what the future will hold from an education perspective. And 100% agree. This is not, we haven't returned, the pendulum hasn't swung all the way back, and it might not be, but you know, points are really well taken and appreciated.
Do we want to move on to the last couple slides?
We do, thank you.
All right. So back to the numbers. So on this slide, this is really just illustrating. So on the left side here, it reflects our budget. So we have a break-even budget for FY22 reflecting enrollment at 10% down from in the fall and 5% down in the spring from the prior year. What we want to show here is with various scenarios of enrollment declines, what the impact would be on the budget. And so in this case, you can see, so if fall is down 15 and spring is down 8%, we would be, the net financial impact, that's a net of revenue and expenses, would be a negative impact of 619,000. And then you can see, how it gets, how that negative impact grows as the enrollment declines further. And so right now, if we were to stay at 20% down for the fall, and then we had 10% down in the spring, that might be a difference in our budget of about $1.1 million. So again, these are just examples, estimates, but just wanted to give you a sense of magnitude of the magnitude of potential fluctuations in enrollment. So this is just really a heads up, and obviously we'll revisit this with updated numbers in the fall. So any questions on this? And if not, we can move on to what I think is the last slide. And this is just really a couple comments here. Dr. Cook, did you want to jump in? Yeah.
No, only just on that last side. I just want to share, at least you have any questions. So, okay, let's say in the worst case scenario, it's an extra $1 million deficit. Where does that money come from? That just means we're chewing through our federal dollars even more quickly, is what we'll share with trustees this coming fall. Again, the masking that we have from the feds, this is a version where how do we overcome these enrollments? We're just going to use that federal money earlier and sooner. So that's really, again, in case there was any question on that piece. And again, my compliments to Andrea for even just the visual. I think it really helps. This type of forecasting, I think, really makes it clear what we can look ahead to see, contemplate, and then how we'll address it. So again, thanks, Andrea.
Thank you. And just a final comment here, actually two final comments. I'll add a B to this as well. So we're looking forward to working with Trustee Sattler he offered his help in looking at our capital projects, both IT and facilities. We have an initial meeting set up in July. And so we will hopefully, when we come back in the fall, be able to report on that. Also, our team in finance will be working on updating our financial reports that we'll be bringing to this committee. And so we'll be working to both optimize our financial systems and see what kind of reports we can create, not just to present to this committee, but also for ourselves, or upgrading our management reporting as well. So both for internal and reporting to trustees. And we also will be looking at sort of just the formats of the reporting, the presentation styles, in addition to, what the data is. So it'll be interesting to have those conversations with you in the fall to see, what your feedback is. We can maybe have a collaborative, iterative discussion about, how we can best provide meaningful information for you. So that's just a quick update there. And I think that's it for us, but happy to answer any questions.
No, Andrea, I think we really appreciate that. And I think the timing would be perfect, right? We have one more full board meeting, as mentioned on the 28th. The next meeting of Ways and Means is the 13th of September. That might give opportunity to be able to see that new reporting, get feedback, and then we can continue to work together cross-collaboratively with the cabinet and the board. So really appreciate taking a look at that and continuing for you all to work with MAC, with Ways and Means, obviously. I already said Mac had to jump off again, so unfortunately you're stuck with me. So the next meeting is September 13th, 2021. as a reminder to everybody on this, we do have a full board meeting on the 28th of this month. We'll keep you updated whether it's face-to-face or virtual. And so I've got some opinions about that, but we'll share that a little bit later. So I just wanted to ask, do I hear a motion to end the Ways and Means meeting for Monday, June 14th, 2021?
So moved.
I second.
Great. Discussion. Hearing none. Nanette, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mary Kate Mirren,
Yes.
Max Starks, Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Maurice Lindsay, Jeff Sattler, and Janae McDonald.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank you,
night,
everybody.
and have a great week.
Thanks. Take
Thank
care.
you too.